Hi ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the unit comparisons and analysis for the bunny comparisons. This is going to be, if you're new to it, a look at the brand new units and what their roles are and some comparisons to other units in the game that can fulfill similar roles to these units. That is an ideal way to look at it. At the end of the video, I cover the mathematics as well, so you can get a good idea of how much orbs on average you need to spend to get these units if you so desire them. Keep in mind that they are seasonal, 5-star exclusives, so a lot of this stuff that I look at will consider more budget options or approaches. Not everything I show will be budget, of course, because a lot of these units are they're kind of unique or like first in class. Everything is not easily comparable. Sorry to you guys that love Marisa, but yeah, that's pretty much the easiest one on this banner to compare to. But generally speaking, a lot of these units are good with full investment, including Loki over here. So Loki is going to be our first one we talk about. As some of you know, I do like Loki as a character. In fact, I think she's actually in my opinion, my favorite OC of this game, because she has the most story that makes sense. Like it's pretty much like Loki of Norse mythology, mischievous and whatnot, and it's written pretty well in the context of in my opinion. Yeah, plus this art is, in my opinion, pretty good. At least I've covered this all on Twitter, so if you want my opinion on that, go check it out. Anyways, let's talk about the unit itself. So flyer formation, guys, that's huge, especially if you watch my air defense and offense video, my ultimate guide. Go check that out as well. She has that, and that means it's a good opportunity to create your own really good flyer balls. However, a good flyer ball doesn't only have flyer formation. There's a lot of key components in that. So if you don't have all the key components, or you don't even invest in flyers at all, then this is not necessarily going to be that useful to you. However, a flying archer is unique because, we just didn't have it before. Like, other than in a 5-star exclusive like Summer Takumi or Hanoka, for instance. So she has a bit of competition, but it's not as easy to pick up. Overall, though, I'm not impressed with her stat spread, because as a colorless physical range damage dealer, she has stat points in places that generally don't matter. And this is very disappointing. So she has a lot less attack and speed than Summer Takumi. And compared to Hanoka, she doesn't have the preference weapon, the Warrior Princess, which, by the way, is still really good. Not only giving drive attack support, but having effective damage against armors is something really good that no other bow can do. So Hanoka and Summer Takumi do outclass her, at least offensively. And here's where a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, oh, but she can probably run defensive stuff. And here is where I would respectfully disagree, because the thing is, from a colorless range damage dealer role, we already have a very tanky unit. And those of you that have witnessed the potential, you know what I'm talking about. And that is on the left. That is my Bath Camilla, Hot Springs Camilla, that I have used plenty of times in AR offense. I'm going to probably include her into AR defense, thanks to Loki now. And I will continue to do so. Because from a competitive perspective, and I'm talking, of course, AR, the thing is, Bathcam has the stats in the places that matter, whereas Loki does not. So having high attack, having high res is far more important than having high defense. And generally speaking, that's pretty much the only thing Loki wins at here. If you consider Loki with one merge, she gets 1 HP, 1 speed, and a res point. She doesn't even get the attack point. So she has a 3 attack difference compared to Camilla. And this is, this could be a problem. I've had plenty of scenarios where you miss those kills. So Loki missing those sort of kills is bad, of course. And when you consider, being able to be a tank. And that's why I have that Summoner Supporter there. That's why I have the Light Blessings effect. Because, again, some people ask me, why don't you just use air when it comes to colorless daggers? Yeah, Light Blessings are the reason you use Bathcam over air, because you can buffer up that way. And Loki, unfortunately, has defense instead. Now, when you consider the res stat, Loki doesn't have as much. She actually has 4 less than Bathcam, and 3 attack makes that difference there. And their speed is exactly the same in this case. So it's not so good. Or maybe Bathcam had 1 more. Either way, the low defense is not so detrimental in AR currently because AR is mostly based on magical damage. Units that you see very commonly are mages, and mages have really high attack. Ophelias, Lilinas, Reinhardts, Veronicas, you know, like even Deirdre's and Julia's, even Sonya, whatever. You're going to see so much more magical damage nukes. In fact, I saw like Celica recently too. You see so many more, magical damage nukes than you see physical. Because physical damage dealers, especially range ones, are not as common or as readily available. Like, I think the most common one I see is actually Soth. That speaks for itself. The defense that Loki has is not going to be so useful in that context. Therefore, Bathcam gets much better stat optimization just the way it is. Plus, she's already been around long enough that if you have Grails, you can already start working on your Camilla versus Loki, who you can't. Also, I want to touch on this. Loki does have some advantages, which is the bow differences and effectiveness against flyers. Of course, that is something to consider. But, and this is also very important, Camilla, on the other hand, has the dagger debuffs, the -7 defense. Now, if you choose to attack into an enemy team, and then end turn there, you have effectively increased your own attack by 7 by lowering theirs by 7. Like, that's just basically doing 7 more damage on every other unit. So dagger debuffs get a lot of utility like that, and Loki on the other hand trades that for like effectiveness against flyers and maybe some other bow options, but she can't use some of the awesome daggers that exist like Smoke or Ouch Pouch, for instance. Like Ouch Pouch Soul is going to be better than Slaying Bow Noontime in general. And even if Slaying Bow Noontime was a bit better, you could be using Barb Shuriken Noontime as a comparable option. So really all you have left for Loki to choose from in different bows are like Clarice's bow, which is pretty much a bad dagger, Brave Bow, which is an offensive use of that bow, which again isn't going to be ideal because you have other colorless physical high damage nukers like Air, or even Camilla herself could maybe run like the Cleaner to do very comparable damage if you're seeing buffs on the enemy team, or even the effective daggers like the Hoshiden ones. Really, you have so much more variety of a dagger than you do with a bow, and this is why Loki fails. Now, and I have seen this point as well, I'm really going to go extensively into this, Guard Bow Loki. So Guard Bow Loki is interesting because it does give 6 defense and 6 res, which can make up for the difference there. But the thing is, first of all, it's only ranged, it doesn't apply to physical, so your melee hits don't get reduced. And secondly, that physical, like magical damage reduction is all in combat. And since you see a lot of AoE damage, like Blazing Light on Ophelia or Blazing Flame on Lilina or whatever, those comparisons, those calculations are done all with the visible res stat. And that means that Camilla, since she has a higher visible res stat, would take less damage from those AoEs than Loki would with a guard bow. Of course, in combat, that Loki would actually take less. But the thing is, because the damage is amplified by the difference of 1.5 times, 50%, it does end up being almost the same in terms of tankiness. And therefore, there is just too many cons for Loki to shine in that aspect. I think, though, and the last thing I will point out, that if you do decide to use Loki, is, as some people may have thought, CC Vantage. But I have already kind of push this agenda with Jomke, and Jomke is still going to be significantly better than Loki in this regard, except on one case where Loki will want to run over like pools or forests or spring water or something like that. So Jomke does suffer if he needs to cover mobility, if he needs to cover ground, and maybe if those maps became more common, then Loki could definitely find a role there. But generally speaking, Jomke actually has about 5 or 6, I believe. I can't remember the exact number. 5 or 6 more attack than Loki. And this is very significant when you're playing with CC Vantage. Every single point of attack matters, because if you miss the kill in Vantage range, you're dead. And that's why Loki would fail as a CC Vantage unit. You can't really say, oh, she can benefit from flyer buffs, because CC Vantage units would be alone. When you send them into the enemy pack, they function independently without stuff like goad flyers or ward flyers. If you use honed flyers, it's not really a good comparison either, because Jomke can use he can use attack tactic or like benefit from, or hone attack 4, which again Loki could also benefit. So in terms of buffs, it's pretty much the same. Goad flyers is definitely something to consider, but it's hard to set that up because your CC Vantage unit needs to be right into the fray and not really benefiting from all those buffs nearby. So I know this might have been a disappointment for some of you that may have expected Loki to be really good. In fact, I was hoping Loki could have been a usable unit, but the fact that she comes with Flyer Formation is a saving grace, and she's not a terrible unit. She just doesn't perform as well in the 2 roles that you would want to use her in. Tanking, outclassed, and CC Vantage, not enough attack. Pretty much the TLDR of that. Moving on, we have I Am a Rabbit, and I Am a Rabbit is pretty much Nino. It's literally what I Am a Rabbit is here. She is just Nino because she has a very similar stat spread to Nino, high speed, high attack, more res than defense, and she has a different preference weapon than Nino. So looking at Nino, the way you want to use Nino is definitely going to be more offensively. Like, she's going to put out way more damage than Veronica would, but Veronica does get a lot more defensive use out of it. So if you run almost a similar build on Veronica, she doesn't want to use stuff like Desperation. She wants to actually be at full health. So you want to be running stuff like Renewal, or even Mystic Boost, to be honest, would be probably a good consideration on her, to make sure you maintain your stats at full health. So it's a very interesting playstyle, rather than stuff like Fury Desperation or Swift Sparrow Desperation. You actually want to be at high health. So that means that the choices you make there are different. So instead of Nino being like aggressive and kind of glass cannon, Veronica is aggressive, fast, but not as squishy because she gets defense and res out of her egg, and she still has comparable attack and speed. You just have to choose different B skills and seals as a result of that. However, I do have to admit that Nino likely does outperform her in the physical aspect, which is because of the true damage delivered by Giga Excalibur, and of course, Desperation is generally pretty good if you can set that up. However, it does suffer against stuff like Worry Fighter. If Brazen Attack Speed Seal became a thing, Nino could be even a lot better than that. So yeah, Nino's generally better. Obviously she's not available as commonly, but she is in the permanent pool and likely going to be much easier to pick up than someone like Veronica if you're going for the offensive green Flyer Mage role. Now, as a secondary way to consider using Veronica, or maybe someone else you may have had in your barracks, there is of course Camilla, Spring Camilla, a 2017 unit of course, and she is interesting because Veronica does get defensive stats, both res and defense, because of her egg, and if you decide to use stuff like renewals or mystic boosts or just noontimes or whatever to keep your health up, then she is functioning in a similar role to what Spring Camilla may accomplish using actually a Grand Owl. This would require some team support, whereas Veronica would act independently, but generally speaking, this could also be done on Veronica, and because the way her egg works, could be used in that way as well. So I think it's interesting. Don't forget that Camilla also can use something like Ron Raven. It's not to say that Veronica can't, it's just that you should really take advantage of the fact that her weapon provides her those buffs. And that's what makes Veronica stand out. So an interesting unit, but if you already have Camilla or Nino, then you probably have one or the other role covered. Okay, next up is... Can we just skip this part? Alright, this may feel like deja vu, guys, for those of you that may have watched my Thea comparisons, because it is. So Marisa is pretty much a very similar stat spread to Shigure and Sumia, I guess, and even Cordelia with plus speed. Yes, Marisa is a bit faster, but you have to consider that she's a 5-star seasonal locked unit, and therefore it would be much harder to merge up, and that makes her unfortunately not very useful compared to all these other units that have preference weapons. Looking at Shanna, you can pretty much have a 16 might weapon with cooldown reduction, running a Gale Force and Fury Desperation build, Shanna has some utility as not only being able to run like a Gale Force build like this, but could also run a tanky build like this in AR, which uses her Wodow slaying effect, kind of like a fur. Unfortunately, Marisa can't do that. And Shanna's a bonus unit right now. So invest in Shanna. For those of you that may have forgotten, you also have Katria. So Katria also, if you tend to use like a flyer ball, has a very similar stat spread as well. High defense, lower res, kind of very similar here. It just doesn't have as much speed, but makes up for it with the White Wing Lance, giving her 3 to all stats. And the Brave effect. So if you haven't invested in a Blue Lance Flyer that's not a 5-star exclusive by now, I don't think I need to push this point any further. These units that have saturated roles, such as Rutger or Marisa or Thea, are pretty much your favorite characters, and you should treat them as such if they're your favorite characters and only use them as that role. But if you're looking at it objectively compared to your other options in the 3- and 4-star pool, they are just not going to be as good investments in the long term. And that's really what it is. Okay, moving on. We have Palla, and this is probably the most unique, actually it is the most unique unit from this banner. For not only being 155 BST, which is really odd for a range unit, because melee units of 1st gen also have that similar stat spreads. But on top of that, her attack stat is really high, her speed is really respectable, and her res is decent. So yeah, it's really good. My issue with this is always has been ranged physical damage. But the saving grace is, of course, that daggers are amazing. For the most part, they have so many options now, and this isn't like Flora where you have a specific niche just to try to kill like distant counter users, and that's pretty much your end result. Therefore, Palla can be far more flexible, and you may even want to consider doing stuff like Barb Shurikens. Like, you don't really have to keep her weapon. Her weapon is like saying, hey, I really want to destroy armor units, and if I have triangle advantage, I want to destroy you even further. Like, it's kind of a super snowball weapon, and I don't actually think it's optimal. Cleaner, Barb Shuriken, get some doubles in there, maybe use a lethal carrot. Like, there's just so many more options when it comes to daggers, effective dagger weapons. There's so much better stuff to consider there than using her default weapon. I'm not a huge fan of it. But if you are to consider Palla's comparisons, then we would likely be looking at a Versa, who is a ranged magical damage dealer. So this isn't the same role, but it is the same color. So if you had to choose between a range flying physical or magical, a Versa could be a good substitute, especially since you can consider that Roarblade, and if you already have invested in a Versa, she's good in all modes. Roarblade is very comparable damage to anything that I think Palla could accomplish, minus cleaner units that might have been buffed, or of course, maybe an effective dagger. Those definitely can compare to the Roarblade, but generally speaking, a Roarblade fully buffed is going to give you like 80 damage right there with a Versa with 1 merge. So that's huge. And then if you consider Desperation, and a Versa's pretty optimized stat spread by having high speed, lets her fulfill that role really easily. A secondary way to obviously consider a Versa is the fact that she has a Versus Knight. As a supportive role, this is very strong in AR. If you haven't already been using it, you generally should. And decided to put Art Duel Flying there as a reminder that she can benefit from it, just like Palla. Palla can also use it, and dagger units aren't too bad in Arena if you decided to use them, because you can run like Wind Sweep and Water Sweep, for instance, get some dagger debuffs that way, avoid your doubles by using the sweep skills, even use Poison Strikes. So yeah, it's all really good that way, but a Versa does have that boon of using a Versus Knight, and Art Duel Flying actually directly benefits the effectiveness of a Versus Knight. So yeah, a Versa, if you haven't already invested, is still going to be having far more utility than someone like Palla could, but Palla is definitely dominating that red physical flying range role because there's no one else that has it right now. Okay, moving on. Oh, yes. I'm actually very pleasantly surprised by Bruno, because Bruno is a stat spread that I never would have expected in 2019. This is interesting because everything in 2019 that's come out so far feels like min-max stat spreads, attack speed, or crazy tankiness, and maybe they have high attack but low speed or something like that, just like min-max to the wire. And to be honest, this is pretty min-max. It's kind of min-max, like it has low res and low speed and decent attack and really high defense. But generally speaking, this is a good stat spread and makes them completely unique towards compared to the other cavalry healers. And therefore, the only unit I can genuinely try to compare him to would be Ethlin, who has a decent defense stat, but more speed and lower attack. So that's pretty much my closest comparison. It's still going to be much different because Bruno, for instance, doesn't have the speed. It could hurt him. But healers want to be used as utility units. So if you decide to use a healer without massively investing in them, then you want to consider their staffs carefully. Do you want to be using pain? Do you want to chip damage? Do you want to maybe Grand Scratcher set up? Maybe do you want to use Joyous Lantern to buff? There's so many cool options you can do with staff units, but generally speaking, I think if you were to use a cavalry healer specifically, my choice of staff would be Gravity minus Witchy Wand, which would be used against Infantry Pulse teams. Gravity staff is interesting because if you know AI very well, you could bait units that are all moving kind of like as a conga line, and then one unit gets danced, and that unit could overextend, especially if you consider Legendary Azura, where the unit gets 3 movement, like the unit that gets danced, and that unit could get picked off by itself if you do a gravity hit and run. This is one interesting way that I really do want to consider in the future, using healers. Unfortunately, there are no flying, there's no flying healers right now that are not 5-star locked, and I don't have the opportunity to test it in full, but I do feel like this is definitely good as a supportive role if you're to consider it. And this is how I would definitely see Bruno being used as well, or any cav healer for the most part. I mean, Bruno's not doing anything super different. His staff does give healing, but that could also be a detriment. I definitely want to consider that an AR to be a problem if you want to set up like CC Vantage, Desperations, Brazens on your own team. There's a lot of anti-synergy that way. The staff is very useful if you go for C-dual infantry, but beyond that, like, Bruno's going to be doing the same thing as any other cav healer would. Now, if you really want to try to use his high defense, then what you can probably do is the build that I've shown here on the left with Ethlin. I wouldn't call it that good. It's just kind of a gimmick or a fun build. Basically, you're just taking advantage of Bruno's really high defense to become like a super tank and absorb. It's like if you played Fire Emblem Awakening, you Nosferatu tank, you just kind of, that's what absorb does. With buffs especially, this becomes really powerful. If you end up being in low health, you have Vantage and Brazen active. So yeah, that's pretty much what that is. I've tried this before with Lisa, actually, who has even lower attack than both of these. So it was kind of fun for a lot of the situations where you could really stat stack them. But that's really the extent of it. It's kind of gimmick, but at least Bruno can run it pretty well because he has so much defense. When you consider the summoner support, Brazen, Flowers, and Merges, the dude can reach like easily up to 50 defense. With buffs, it's not a problem. And his attack reaches about 50 as well. And since he's hitting res, that's kind of fun. You know, he can really have a frontline wall that way. Okay, that pretty much covers all my units in the unit analysis comparisons. I hope you could take something away from it. Let's take a quick look at the mathematics for those of you that may need your reminders. So, red, as we all know by now, especially on a 4-person banner, takes an extensive amount of orbs, up to 400 for 1 in 10 people. So if you were targeting... who's red on this? Palla, right. And she's actually the most unique one. Palla's the most unique one, and to spend up to 400 orbs for a Palla is generally not going to be so good because our average income of orbs monthly is less than that. It hasn't been 400 except on occasions where we have an anniversary or something like that. So generally speaking, you know, don't go into this with that sort of risk. Do consider the banner is also a month long. So pulling day 1 or even within the first week is generally not advised. Wait until the mythic banner shows up, see what the next banner might be, and make your decision as educated as possible between your options to say, do I really need this unit? Is it really going to fulfill a function on the team that can do it? All this can be applied to the green, blue, and colorless of this banner. Specifically blue. I don't see a person saying they need Marisa on their team when there's so many other ones that could do that role. And of course, green does have G dual flying, but generally speaking, I'd say just wait until a legendary mythic banner where she could potentially share with somebody like Lecter, which is very good fodder, and plenty of other green units as well. Maybe Brave Ephraim makes a return, for instance. So yeah, that's going to be my take on this spring banner. As always, some interesting unit roles, unit movement types, and such have come. The free unit is very cool, very amazing, very good fodder. I'm very happy to have Flyer Formation available to us. Definitely going to be theory crafting and putting together something amazing with that. And with all that said, you guys can expect the Mythic Banner predictions to be coming out tomorrow, possibly the day after, but probably tomorrow. And of course, I'll be doing my impressions and analysis on that banner when it does come out. Hopefully an Astro Mythic comes out because we've been saving tons of warps for that, and that is our chance to climb up to AR27 during Astro seasons. Okay, that's pretty much it. Please let me know in the comments below which of these units you may desire to make some fun builds with maybe. Is there anyone you're going to wait for in a Mythic Banner or Legendary Banner rerun? Are you personally saving for a different banner this year? Please let me know what you think. How do you feel about Loki? Are you actually going to invest in her, or maybe do you consider maybe taking some pretty sweet fodder out of that? All right, leave a video a thumbs up if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it very much. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.